Now, we can all understand and agree that when it comes to the NFL draft, it is a massive crapshoot. An absolute massive crapshoot. Which is a reflection, as much as anything else, of just how many people involved with the NFL that do this as part of their living don't know what they're doing and are not good at their jobs. And as Bears fans, we are more than familiar with that, am I right? We know all about that. But my whole thing with new general manager Ryan Poles is that all these folks that were sitting there saying they do like or don't like what Ryan Poles is doing, I said, like, at the end of the day, it mostly comes down to the draft. And we haven't even seen anything out of him in the draft yet. So how could we possibly make any informed decisions before we've even had a chance to see what he does in the draft? Because that's what it's ultimately going to come down to. Because this Bears team is really bad. Their roster is really bad. They're going to need multiple drafts to fix this thing. And to get it right, if they even can. But to suggest before the draft that you have full faith and confidence in Ryan Poles is just naive, sheepish, markish, dumbass behavior. And to sit there and say that you have no faith and confidence in him at all when you haven't even seen him make a pick is really dumb, stupid, idiotic behavior as well. But now, after Friday night, after day 2 of the 2022 NFL draft, we have seen Ryan Poles ultimately make 3 draft selections. And I have to tell you, based on the early returns, I'm not impressed. Not at all. For 3 key reasons. Number 1, the strategy and the approach to the draft. Number 2, the lack of what feels like to me the basic understanding of how to play the draft game. And number 3, the actual players taken. Start off with the strategy and approach. Everyone saying Ryan Poles and the Bears drafted based off of best player available is full of shit. Just like is so often the case with Bears Twitter, Bears social media, Bears media, they are full of shit. They look for any excuse they possibly can to be sheepishly all about giving an organization the benefit of the doubt when absolutely none of it has been merited or deserved. You cannot honestly look at what the Bears did in the draft on Friday night and say that this feels like best player available. This is what should really concern you. This draft and that philosophy on Friday night either shows that A, Ryan Poles feels defense is the bigger need for this team, which is massively concerning, or even worse, B, if you actually want to believe the bullshit about best player available when the massive majority of teams in the NFL every year in the draft for need first. They draft for need first. This was an actual reflection of their draft board, which suggests they don't know what the hell they're doing. And frankly, I don't know which one was worse. To come into this draft, I'm not surprised one of those 2nd round picks ended up being a defensive player. But both of them? That to me is establishing a theme, a trend, a pattern. The theme, the trend, the pattern. Hiring defensive-minded head coach. First notable attempted move in the offseason and free agency was to try and sign Larry Ogunjobi, a 3-technique defensive tackle for your defensive-minded head coach's new system. And then you turn around in the draft and your first 2 draft picks are on the defensive side of the ball. Ladies and gentlemen, we've got the perpetuation of Bears football! The number 1 goal of the program, the number 1 priority, the only thing that matters is helping Justin Fields. And this approach ain't it. You'll have those Bears football morons that'll talk about, well, you help the young quarterback with defense and special teams and field position and running the ball. Like we ain't been down that path before. You guys are fucking addicted. It's your Hallis Hall hopium and you can't get enough of it. That should be the number one goal of the program, is to help Justin Fields, and this ain't it. And to the whole best player available bullshit, if this team actually practiced best player available, Malik Willis would have been the pick at 71. Or somebody else. It sure as hell wouldn't have been Velez Jones Jr. Let's be 100% honest about this. You can be sitting there and choosing to be optimistic when you don't have reason to be, choosing to give benefit of the doubt that is either neither merited or deserved. But can we at least be honest here about what we're seeing? The strategy and approach was stupid. And then you double down with the lack of playing the draft game. Don't tell me that draft trade downs weren't possible. There were too many of them that happened on day 2. Ooh, teams weren't calling. Then you know what? Sometime, ding dong, gum dicks, you might have to make the call to initiate. To come into this draft, you already didn't have the first round pick, and that's neither here nor there. It's a positive for sure that they didn't give up future picks to move up. That is positive. But I'm reaching here for positives. One of the main goals of the program here should have been to acquire additional draft pick capital both for this draft and especially next year. And the Bears on Friday night failed to accomplish either of those goals. And part of the reason for trading away a Khalil Mack, not just to get out from under the contract, but is to reallocate your resources and reconstruct your team around fucking Justin Fields. To then double back down on 2 defensive players in the second round is fucking stupid. That's not how you play the draft game. And the draft this year in general, part of the reason it felt like a mid-draft is because it was much better on the defensive side of the ball. The depth on defense was much better. So why not trust the draft's depth on defense and wait until day 3 to fill some of those needs? And the failure to acquire additional draft pick capital, both for this year and especially for next year, when you're going to want it, you're going to need it, is gross incompetence. And the reality is we shouldn't be that surprised because a lot of first-time general managers, their first drafts are not banner successes. And as Bears fans, you're also used to and comfortable and familiar with this because it's true. And then you look at the actual players taken. Imagine if I told you before the draft that the Chicago Bears could get David Ojabo at 39, George Pickens at either 39 or 48, and then somebody like a Dylan Parham, a Bernard Raymond, or David Bell at 71. You would have been doing backflips and giving it an A+ grade. And I would have understood. You would have taken arguably the best player in the board at that point at 39, a wide receiver with, some concerns, but some massive upside and potential at 48. And you would have addressed potentially the offensive line or taken a receiver that so many in the Bears fan base loved in David Bell in round 3. What you would have done, you could have made an argument for best player available with each of those 3 picks, and you would have given Justin Fields more help. And at the end of the day, they didn't take a single one of these guys. Imagine if I told you before the draft, this is what their draft results could have looked like on Friday night. You would have been doing backflips. And they went in a much, much different direction. Why should you go out of your way to be positive about it now when a week ago, if I would have told you this was their draft class, and I would have told you they could have had these players that I just mentioned, you would have been pissed. Don't be hypocrites. Now, don't get me wrong. Kyler Gordon was taken in the right range. He's got upside for sure. He fits the Eberflus cover 2 system very well. So I understand drafting him in that range. But again, I come down to this draft had really good depth on the defensive side of the ball. You didn't have to take a corner here at 39. You did not. Jaquan Brisker, I think, to me, was the best pick out of the 3 they made on Friday night. He's a day 1 starter, eventually a replacement for Bareback Jackson as the primary safety on this team. I love his upside. I'm not complaining too much about the pick. And honestly, if you look at those first 2 picks in a bubble, they are not egregious or bad or anything like that. They certainly were not reaches. They are guys that you could have made an argument had some first-round potential to them. In a bubble, on their own, they are solid picks. They are going to be good players in this Bears defense. But it's not just about the bubble. You have to look bigger strategy, bigger vision, bigger picture. That's where this falls short. And even in the Velez Jones Jr. case, of all the wide receivers to take, you passed on so many. You get here to pick 71 in round 3. And when you finally take one, yes, you take a guy that can absolutely fly, and is impressive at the size that he has, that he can fly like that, but you basically took a gadget guy. You basically took Cordero Patterson up to and including the school that Velez Jones Jr. comes from. Special teams is his most notable area. It'd be different if the Bears were close to being a contending team or something. A guy like Jones, you could argue, would have as much impact as anybody they could draft. But that's not where we're at. He took 6 years in college to become a productive wide receiver. And he was only a productive wide receiver his last year at Tennessee in 2021 when he's 24 years old. And you could say, well, the age thing, he's 25 next month, is overrated. Yes and no. Not so much from hey, how old will he be when his second contract comes? It's more a reflection of how much upside does a guy really have when it took him 6 years in college to become an even somewhat productive wide receiver, and he was doing it against kids that on average were 2, 3, 4, 5, damn near in some cases 6 years younger than him. It's like a 15-year-old playing a 10 or 11-year-old on the basketball court. Usually not going to go well for the smaller kid. So how much upside is there? He shouldn't be a bust. But of all the receivers you're going to take, this is the guy. And if you want to believe this is best player available, you really look at Velez Jones Jr. and you honestly can tell yourself he felt like the best player available on the board at pick 71. Well, they had FOMO, fear of missing out, because they didn't have a 4th round pick. Then you know what? Find a way to trade the fuck down and take him later in round 3. At least acquire some additional draft capital. Or find a way to get a 4th round pick and then you take him there. Too many other good talents, better talents, on both, frankly, the offensive and defensive side of the ball at this point at 71 to sit there and waste a pick on Velez Jones Jr. That's dumb! So you can feel however the hell you want about it right now. A lot of you are going to choose dopey, undeserved optimism, and that's fine. I'm used to that from you clowns. But count me as not impressed with the early results here of Ryan Poles' draft approach, philosophy, and strategy. It's less alone about the players taken, and I know that is nuance and context that a lot of you may not understand or choose to grasp. It is more about the larger, bigger picture, the approach, that they felt that defense was more important than offense in this draft. They drafted for need, and they drafted defense first. That's the theme, that's the trend, that's the pattern. That, ladies and gentlemen, is Bears football! So why the hell would I choose to be excited about that?